Hello, I'm Greg Holbrook. The family of Lois Tipton has traced their ancestry back 5 generations here in Florida. With such deep roots in the community, Lois became the ideal candidate to write a column about local history and traditions. Old Days, Old Ways quickly became a popular feature that focused on the lives of everyday people: teachers, train conductors, and citrus workers. Speaking of citrus, Lois can recall a time when New Smyrna was a prime location for packing and shipping Florida oranges. To learn more about this, let's return to our special interview with Dr. Frank Farmer and the former writer for The Observer, Lois Tipton.
One of the things I remember about the Florida East Coast Railroad, it was tied in so closely with the orange industry here in New Smyrna Beach. I can remember at Christmas time where there'd be thousands of oranges being shipped on big railroad boxcars.
Yeah.
Going up north. Tell us about the orange industry. And today, there is no orange industry in New Smyrna, but that was a big part of it.
Oh, yes, indeed. I remember the down by, let me see if I can tell you, there's a little railroad track that you go to.
Osborne Furniture.
Yes, that's there. Where it was, yeah. Okay, they had a lady in there, I never will forget, her name was Mrs. McCorkle, and she lived right down the end of the street on Myrtle Avenue. And she worked there to do the oranges packing. And they'd bring in these oranges in bulk. And she would sit at a desk or a table, and I remember seeing her do it so well. She'd reach over and she'd snatch up one little thin sheet of paper that had a logo on it, and she'd take that orange and she'd go. I saw her do it by the hour.
She must have done thousands of them.
Wrapping the oranges in paper individually with a logo. It had a logo on the paper.
So there'd be hundreds of boxes of oranges.
Oh. That woman worked herself to death. And she was a big, heavy-set lady, lovely woman, quiet, lived right down the street from where I live. She and her husband, she was real heavy and fat and plump and happy, you know, and he was just like a rail. It was the cutest little couple.
So this was a big part.
Oh yeah, oh indeed. And she would wrap that orange it would be right into, well, you know where the furniture store is?
Yeah.
That's where it was.
But the oranges came from
oh yeah, they came from all around. Everybody brought their oranges in.
There is no orange industry.
They didn't wash them or anything. They just I've seen them do it by the hour, and I often wondered about that poor woman's arms. I know she was tired.
Well, as I said, the orange industry no longer exists here. I'm not sure of all the reasons why. There's a myriad.
Well, I do. They used the land instead of growing orange groves. They used it for building homes.
So the land became more valuable as real estate for construction
than it did
as for orange groves. Is that
right?
And I think that's
normal.
Part of it, and plus. I think this part of the state of Florida is right on the frost line, where if you go further north, the cold season
freezes.
And of course, we've had multiple bad freezes here in Florida that have killed the orange trees multiple times.
You know, I remember that, and I remember going to school, and it is stark in my memory about being so cold that my mother would put a sweater on us and a blouse and a sweater and a long sleeve and then a coat on top of that. And we don't have those freezes like that.
Well, I guess there is something to the fact that we are warming.
Yep.
And as you've certainly noticed it over your
indeed I did.
Years.
Oh, I remember my daddy would just pile the blankets on us at night because we'd be so cold, you know. I remember because we'd be in a twin, we were little, and he'd bring in great big, she'd go in the living room, we had a fireplace, that's all we had.
That was your
no other heat of any kind, except the fire in the stove in the kitchen that she put kindling wood. I can see her now take her knife and shake, do a piece of wood to that fat pine, and she'd drop it in there and start a little fire to cook. That's what we cooked with.
So you had a fireplace for cooking and for trying to keep warm. And
The fireplace was it. That was all we had.
And you remember some very cold.
Oh, my dad would bring in a big log that big, you know, and I remember seeing him taking little pieces of wood and tucking it underneath it, and it would lighten them. And that wood would burn for days. It would be days and days. That it would just be like a round ball of fire, you know.
Now, do you remember when you went to school? Was there heat in the schools or air conditioner or no?
We had coats.
Coats. You wore coats
Yep.
to stay warm.
Oh yeah. And then they let us out when the sun would come out real good. You know, sometimes we'd go outside and they'd let us out into the sun. But they had a little pot-bellied stove somewhere. I remember seeing it. I don't know what part of the school they were in. It was in, but we had a little pot-bellied stove, and everybody be around that little pot-bellied. It's just like the church. I'm Episcopalian, and I grew up in the church. You just turned and went one block, and the Episcopal church was on the corner. And then they moved it down into...
And of course, the churches didn't have a heat.
Oh, no.
Oh.
We had that little pot-bellied stove, though. And I remember one of the girls had a new coat, and it accidentally got on the side of the coat of the stove and burned a little bit. And you could smell it all over all over the school.
Now, you were born, you told me, in 1923. So
Right.
when the Great Depression hit, the Great Depression started, of course, with the fall of the stock market in 1929, and it really got into its heyday in the early 1930s, 32, 33, 34, and you lived through that.
Right.
Do you remember those days?
Oh, yes, sir.
I assume it had a terrible negative effect on this area because it had a terrible negative effect across the country, across the world. Do you remember how it affected this area?
We had very little, but we always had food. My mother somehow she always arranged it. I never remember going to bed
So
hungry.
you never went hungry as many families did.
Never.
America.
Oh yes. Oh yes. The black families suffered a lot because people couldn't hire them. See, for any reason.
And at that time, there was very little relief. There wasn't a Social Security or other things, so people.
I had nothing to fall back on unless you'd saved your money.
So did some people go hungry? I mean.
Oh, I'm sure they did. I can remember my mother. We lived right where the house is today, on that corner, and I can remember what my mother used to say were called bums. And they were the people that had no home, nobody, no one to take care of them, nobody coming in or anything, were hungry. And they would come to our back door where they could come off the side of Myrtle Avenue and come in. And I remember any number of times they would say, "Ma'am, if you just fix me a butter and bread sandwich, that's enough." And my mother did. No matter what we had, she shared it.
So there was a significant number of those people
That were hungry.
in this area
Yes, sir.
that did go hungry.
Good people. You could tell they were good people. They were looking for work, and there wasn't any, you know. Like the people in the town had the work. So they didn't get a work. They'd float from place to place hunting work.
Well, I imagine a number of them probably caught rides on the railroad.
Oh, yes.
Back and forth.
Nothing. You always saw them. They were always either up on top of the car or in between the cars because they couldn't get in the cars. See, they would lock the cars. They had when they closed the doors, the trainmen had locks that they locked it.
So the FEC locked their cars, and the people would get on the route
In between them.
That sounded pretty dangerous to me.
Well, it was, but that's the only way they had unless they walked, you know. And because cars back then, we didn't have a car. We didn't even know what having a car was. We walked, you know, if we went anywhere. We didn't have.
As a teenager, you did not have a car?
No, sir. No way. Why, that would be unheard of. We did not have a car.
So there weren't many cars in the New Smyrna Beach area?
Walk to school, rain or shine.
all the way to the Faulkner Street or the New Smyrna Beach Live Oak School during that Depression. Now, did many banks or financial institutions fail here in the...
A lot of them did, yes indeed. A lot of them closed up because they just didn't have the money. There was no money passing. It was awful. It was a very terrible era. I hope we never, dear God, ever go back to that again.
Now, I assume that a number of businesses failed also, did they not?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Their whole life.
They had stuff to sell, but nobody had any money.
So it was a terrible time.
Oh yes, oh yes. We lived through it though, you know. If you've got the will, you can do it. And my mother, bless her heart, she could make a meal out of nothing.
Well, you said that you never went hungry. Your family.
Never went hungry, ever.
But you knew a lot of people who did go hungry in this area.
It was pitiful, really. And children would come to school with the same clothes they had on the day before.
Now, at that particular time, Franklin Delano, you mentioned you saw Franklin Delano Roosevelt one time as he was traveling on the train, but he became president 1932, or elected in 1932, became president, and instituted a whole program to try to help people. Do you remember some of the programs, what was called the Works Progress Administration, the public...
WPA.
WPA, and others, the Civilian Concentration Corps.
But you know what? It got to the point of where some of the people that ran the WPA here were partial to some people. You know what I mean?
So there were favorites.
Oh yeah.
Attempted to...
And there were people who were too proud to even ask.
Really?
Oh yeah. There were children growing up. I could always tell. I never will forget, in our class, one of the classes we had, my mother would always fix us a lunch. We'd have a sandwich and an apple or some little treat that she'd put in there. And I can remember any number of times that my lunch would disappear.
And somebody would take it.
And I knew that whoever took it just didn't have it, you know? And I remember telling Mother about it a couple of times, and she'd say, well, I don't know what we can do about it, but I'll talk to the principal about it and see if there's something we can do, maybe to help them so they're not hungry. Hungry children is awful.
Now, at that time, there probably was not programs in the schools to feed the kids, were there?
No, yeah, there were, but you were looked down on if you had. There was a caste system there,
so
you know.
If you got a free meal, you had to.
They knew the other children. You know, children could be mean to each other, you know, at times. And they wouldn't want anybody to know they didn't have it. And they'd say, I'm not hungry. Really? I'd say, you want half of my sandwich? I'm not hungry. Well, I knew they were. My mother always put, like, if we didn't have chips back then, potato chips, we didn't know what they were. But she always put a little treat or something in our lunch, you know, just to entice us to eat. And a lot of times I gave it away because I knew they didn't have it. They just didn't have it, that's it. And it hurt me to think that they were hungry. And a lot of children where you could tell by their clothes, you could tell their bodies, you know, they weren't clean a lot of times because they didn't have the place to get clean.
Now, during this period of time in the 1930s, during the Depression, the Florida East Coast Railroad kept operating, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So do you remember them laying off people during that?
Oh, I certainly do. Like I told you, the guy that lived right next behind me, Virgil Guest was his name, and he went to California because there were no jobs available. He couldn't get he was a conductor, and no, he was a tradesman. And there wasn't any work on the railroad, so he had to do something. And he never came back. He left.
At that particular time, are you familiar with the barter system where you trade something without money? You got something from a doctor, paid a bill with a chicken. Was that did the barter system become pretty?
I don't remember a whole lot about that because My mother would have done it, you see, if she did it. But somehow that lady we never went hungry. Never. Never in my life was I ever hungry.
As opposed to many of the children that you...
Many little children, lots of the black ones, go to school with no bread, no lunch, no breakfast, nothing. And you could tell they were hungry because if you had a sandwich, for example, my mother would make us a real thick sandwich. She'd put everything in the book on it. And you could tell they would look like, oh, if I only had that, you know. Many, many times my sister and I would, I just couldn't eat. It hurt to see them hungry, see a child hungry.
Yeah,
and even at that age, I knew, you know, you could tell.
The hunger and hardships of the Great Depression lasted for most of the 1930s. Unfortunately, those sacrifices would continue into the 1940s with the onset of World War II. By 1942, New Smyrna residents would face food rationing and blackouts along the coast as the United States prepared its people for war. Lois Tipton has more to share about the war's impact on our local community, as well as her brief stint as an office worker at the Pentagon. That's all coming up on our next episode. Until then, for the New Smyrna Museum of History, I'm Greg Holbrook.